Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to the 4th Butterfly Festival. Thank you for taking the time to attend today's talk. Before we start today's proceedings, I would request all the audience members to please keep yourselves on mute and keep your videos off so that the streaming will be faster for everyone. And if you have any questions, please use the chat box to drop your question and ask the question at the end of each section. With that being said, as you all know, today's talk is the second of the 5 talks being organized as part of the 4th Karnataka Butterfly Festival. Yesterday, we had a very well-attended talk by Hanish about early stages and host plants of butterflies. The record version of this talk will soon be available on the Bangalore Butterfly Club YouTube channel. And today's topic is butterfly biology for the general public. And today's speaker is Nitin Ravikanthachari. And it is my privilege to introduce today's speaker, Nitin. Nitin is originally from Bangalore. His work on Indian butterflies has taken him to almost all parts of India. This includes neighboring places like the Western Ghats and Kerala, as well as remote locations in the northeastern states, Western Himalayas, and even the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. Over the last 10 years, members of BBC have seen Nitin transform from an enthusiastic undergraduate student into a PhD scholar teaching other students. Today, Nitin is a PhD student in the lab of Professor Carol Boggs at the University of South Carolina, studying the genetics of butterfly host plant interactions. This journey of his has been marked with several achievements, and some of the few significant ones include the rediscovery of the lilac silverline after a gap of 100 years, a species of butterfly that was thought to have gone extinct, and it was rediscovered at Hesarghatta Lake bed by Nitin. He has also authored a much acclaimed research paper titled The Larval Host Plants of Butterflies of the Western Ghats. He, along with Ashok Sengupta, Hanish, and Rohit Girotra, co-founded the Bangalore Butterfly Club, a citizen science initiative to promote the awareness about and the study of butterflies in Karnataka. He, along with Dr. Krishnamay Kunte, has co-authored the book Butterflies of Bengaluru. Nitin is an encyclopedia of knowledge, and over the last several years, he has selflessly shared his knowledge with his fellow colleagues, other scientists, and the public at large. His ability to communicate complex topics in an easy to understand language and his patient approach make him a pleasure to listen to. And he's always ready to clear the doubts of anybody who has some. I'm sure that people of all categories, high school students, undergraduates, graduates, postgraduates, PhD scholars, nature lovers, teachers, amateurs, and professional naturalists who are attending today's talk will benefit from Nitin's knowledge. With that brief introduction, I would like to hand over the proceedings to Nitin. Thank you, Nitin, for taking the time from your busy schedule to so generously share your knowledge with us as part of the 4th Karnataka Butterfly Festival proceedings. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Priya. That was quite an introduction, and it makes me feel a little shy, but yeah. So before we begin, I'd like to encourage all of you to mute yourselves so that there is no disturbance occurring when I'm speaking. And if you want to ask questions, you can use the chat option, and I will be monitoring the chat option to make sure that I answer all the questions in the end. But if you have a pressing question which you really need it answered right away, unmute yourself for a brief while, and then you can ask the question at the end of each section. And if you want to contact me, I've left my email IDs here. The iPhone Butterflies email ID, which I checked specifically for butterfly-related emails, and my official ID for anything which is official. And I'm also on WhatsApp, but I usually respond very slowly on WhatsApp. So email would be the faster option to contact me. So today's talk will be basically introducing the biology of butterflies to the general public. Sorry, just a second. I have no idea why this happened. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, so the basic idea is to introduce what scientists have learned over the last 60, 70 years about the biology of butterflies, why it is important, and what can we humans learn from their biology. And one of the most difficult jobs for any academician or any scientist is to communicate his or her results to the general public. We are, as you march on the academic circle, you get more and more specialized, and you kind of lose your touch with the general public. And like Richard Feynman said, if you can explain what you do to a 5-year-old, that means you understand what you do very well. And that is one of the reasons why I'm really passionate about uh, citizen science and also imparting popular science knowledge to all the general public. So in that spirit, I'll be talking about the biology of butterflies. And one thing I want to make sure is that if you think that I'm going fast, or if you think I'm explaining something which is too complicated, please let me know so that I can slow myself down and then explain some things in detail. So just use the chat option to do that, and it should be fine. So to begin with, I'd like to go on explaining about what I do for my PhD. So I'm doing my PhD with Professor Carol Boggs at the University of South Carolina. And I work at the Rocky Mountain Biological Laboratory during the summer, where all my experiments take place. I'm primarily interested in looking at the genetics of butterfly-plant interactions, basically looking at what kind of genes are involved when butterflies are feeding on a particular set of plants. Why are butterflies not able to feed on a particular set of plants? What are the genetic changes that happens, both in plants as well as butterflies? And this ties into understanding how climate change or invasive species, cause maladaptation in butterfly plant interactions. So what I mean by that is that let's assume that we have the southern birdwing butterfly or the Sahyadri birdwing butterfly, which feeds on pipevine plants, the Aristolochia plants. And it feeds on a lot of plants which are available natively in India, but there are a lot of Aristolochia which is also found elsewhere in the world. So what happens to this butterfly when you get in uh, exotic Aristolochia plants? Are they able to do well? Are they not able to do well? Why are they not able to do well? And these are the questions I try to answer, specifically using invasive species. And this, I use a multi-dimensional approach with understanding what happens at the population level and also at the individual level. So you combine a lot of population genetic models and methods along with a lot of molecular biology methods to understand this. And this right here, is the species that I work with in the Rocky Mountain Biological Laboratory. And that's known as the sharp-veined white. It's a relative of the cabbage white that we see in India. And this is how my field site looks like in the summer. It's one of the best places that I've worked in so far, specifically because the community there is so strong. The Rocky Mountain Biological Laboratory, hosts around like over 200 scientists during the summer, from undergrads to PhD students to professors, and we all work together there. So if you ever get a chance to visit the US and you get a chance to visit Colorado, this is one place I would definitely recommend people visit. It's a beautiful place, and it's filled with it's made for a natural historian's paradise. So this is my field site. So for today's talk, I've divided into a few particular topics that I thought would be interesting for the public. And if you ask me, I can go on talking about butterflies probably forever. And to compress all of what I can speak in 40 minutes was definitely a hard uh, choice for me, but I feel that these are the things that the audience might benefit most out of. So I'll be specifying a brief introduction of what butterflies are and why we use butterflies as a model system, a little bit about the background, evolution and phylogeny as to how they came about, and how are butterflies related to other organisms, and then finally into the life history of butterflies, looking at the biology of each and every aspect of their life history, be it oviposition or looking at things or mimicry or anything like that. And uh, and also I've tried to use very few landmark studies to highlight these points, but you should know that there is huge variation in anything that I talk about, and what I talk about is just a small tiny bit of what is out there in the world about butterflies. And I'm always more than happy to talk about more of this whenever there is time or whenever an opportunity presents to me. So, what are butterflies? So, butterflies belong to the order known as Lepidoptera, and lepis means scale, and pteron means wing. And they're called as Lepidoptera, because if you have ever touched a butterfly accidentally, or if you picked up a dead butterfly, you will see that your fingers have powdery substances on it which are colored, and that's nothing but the scales of these butterflies which have come onto your hands. So butterflies have scales, and that is why they are under the order Lepidoptera. Worldwide, there are around 18,000 species, and people are still describing a lot of new species. And it's, yeah, I mean, people will be describing a lot of new species in the coming future as well. And in India, we have 1,800 taxa. When I say taxa, I mean subspecies, species combined together. And India is a huge reservoir or a huge diversity hotspot for butterflies as well. And these 17,500 or 18,000 butterflies are grouped under 7 different families, 6 of which are found all over the world, and one family called as Hedelidae, which is only found in the neotropics. And butterflies are what scientists call them as holometabolous insects. So holometabolous means that they undergo complete metamorphosis. So the first thing that people associate butterflies is with metamorphosis, because you have an egg, a caterpillar hatches out, and then it forms a pupae and then comes out as an adult. Each of them have distinct forms and features. So a butterfly does not look anything similar to a pupae, or a pupae does not look anything similar to a caterpillar, and so on. And this is because there's complete metamorphosis happening in these insects. If you look at grasshoppers, they are hemimetabolous insects, or ametabolous, because a grasshopper, when it's born, it's a small tiny grasshopper, and with each and every molt it just increases in size, but the shape and size remains the same. I mean the size differs, but the shape or general appearance of the insect remains the same, and those are different. And one interesting thing about butterflies is that the females are heterogametic. What I mean by that is that if you look at humans, so how do we determine the sex of a human being? It's either a male or a female, and males have X and Y chromosomes, and females have X and X chromosomes, two X chromosomes. In butterflies, it is reversed. So it's the females who have the X and Y chromosomes, and the males who have the X chromosome, just the X chromosome. So it's a really interesting uh, you know reversal, and it's also found in birds. So birds and butterflies have the system where the females are heterogametic, and that has its own interesting biology, and people have been studying it for a very long time. And one more interesting thing about butterflies is that most of them are diurnal. So what I mean by diurnal is that all of them are, or most of them are active during the day, and they're not active during the night. And that's one really important feature that distinguishes butterflies from moths. So moths are usually nocturnal, that means they're active in the night, and butterflies are diurnal, that means they're active in the morning. And this feature, the diurnal and nocturnal, itself has a very interesting biology in the way that the butterflies, which the plants that are depending on the butterflies have different evolution, and the plants that are depending on moths have different evolutionary histories, and that itself is a huge fascinating subject, and people have been studying it for a very, very long time. I'm also using a lot of what do you call scientific terms just to get you guys uh, acclimatized, or familiarized with the terms that scientists use as well. So in case you read this in a popular science magazine, you might be able to understand what it means. So that's also the reason why I'm just retaining some of the words that I think are important. So what is the point of studying butterflies for our for in biology in general, or for human beings? So most of what we know about mimicry in nature has come from the study of butterflies. So it was William Bates and who studied Batesian mimicry in the neotropics in South America, who came up with the model of how mimicry occurs. And without butterflies, I don't think we would have had so much of a leap, or so much of understanding of what mimicry can be. And the second most important, which is also seriously important for human beings at this point in time, is the study of coevolution. The first study of coevolution was done by Paul Ehrlich and Peter Raven in 1964, and that was done using butterflies as a model system. And why is coevolution important? It is really important because coevolution talks about how butterflies and plants are related, and how both of them are evolving together. And this is important because based on what is happening or what we're doing or how much we are messing with the co-evolutionary dynamics of these butterflies and plants, we might have profound implications in agriculture and pest control and things like that. And that's also one of the reasons why, a lot of uh, agricultural practices fail in times when it comes to pest control, because people really do not think about co-evolution. They think, we can just spray DDT and kill things off, or we can just spray something else and then kill things off. But there's always this phenomenon where plants or animals can gain resistance to whatever you're doing, and that they can start co-evolving to whatever resistance it's being met to them. So it's really important to bring in co-evolution into our understanding of agricultural sciences so that we can better manage our agricultural resources. And visual ecology. Butterflies depend a lot on vision, and we know a lot more about vision in general because of butterflies. And we know we have a lot of systems, man-made systems based on butterfly vision, simply because it helps us see beyond what the human eye is capable of. And another field which has tremendously benefited from studying butterflies is the field of biomimicry, where people have used models that are out in nature to build things and use them as use them in science and technology. So a lot of drones and things like that, which have butterfly, which are based on butterfly structure, or butterfly, the way the butterflies can bask and get sunlight. So it's all based on the flight dynamics. And the most well-known migration, apart from the Arctic tern and a few birds, is the monarch migration, which is in North America. And we have used monarch migration to look at what helps migration, what are the factors that determine migration, and what happens when butterflies are migrating and things like that. And lastly, a lot of population biology, how populations react to environments, how are populations structured, and things like that were actually first found using butterflies, and that was done in Sweden. So these are just some of the things that are important, important things that we have learned by studying butterflies. But there are tons more that we can study from looking at butterflies. So the first question that I want to tackle is, when did butterflies evolve? So butterflies, people earlier thought that butterflies and plants evolved together because that's why they are in this co-evolutionary race. And people thought that butterflies evolved the same time that plants came into, plants evolved on Earth. But what we now know is that the oldest fossil of a butterfly was found 200, belonged to a butterfly-like insect 260 million years ago. And this was found accidentally. So what happened here was that scientists were looking at pollen samples under the microscope, fossilized pollen, and they found these scales along with it. And this represents the first butterfly-like organism, and this was 60 or 70 million years previous to what was known. And this has implications in the term that we know that butterflies feed on nectar, but did they always feed on nectar? And did the butterflies get the proboscis because of feeding on nectar? But because of this discovery, we know that the butterflies had proboscis even before plants evolved, or the land plants evolved. And what they used to do with those proboscis, people don't know, but people just speculate that they were feeding on water droplets on the leaves and other things like that. And when did butterflies actually origin? The modern day butterflies, and that was sometime in the late Cretaceous, which is 119 years ago. Late Cretaceous is right around the time of the our dinosaurs. So it is, if you see here, this is when the butterflies evolved, and it's around 119, 120 million years ago. And one important thing from this diagram is that all butterflies are moths, because butterflies are a group of moths, but all moths are not butterflies. So that's a distinction that you need to remember. And what do we know about the evolution of modern day butterflies? So most of the modern day butterflies evolved after the Paleocene and the Cretaceous and Paleogene extinction, which happened 65 million years ago. So what is this Paleogene Cretaceous extinction? This is the extinction that killed the dinosaurs. So most of the modern day butterflies evolved right after the dinosaurs were killed because of this mass extinction, which happened 65 million years ago. And what we do know is that when we know that there are 7 different families of butterflies, we know that the Papilionidae, the swallow-tailed butterflies, are the sister group to all the other butterflies. That means these butterflies branched off way early in the evolution. And when I and this kind of forms the basal group to all the other butterflies that we see in the world right now. And what we know about each of the families diversification, that means how, when did they start becoming, more species, or when they start like speciating, is that different families have different years or different time points in evolution that they actually diversified. And the oldest is Papilionidae, and the youngest is Lycaenid and Nymphalidae, the blues and the brush-footed butterflies. So if you see Papilionidae, the old, the basal group, and Lycaenid and Nymphalidae here, which are the most derived groups. And that was just a basic background on what uh, the evolution of butterflies were. And I'll now delve deep into the life history of butterflies. So the thing that I am interested the most in life is, how do butterflies choose host plants? Why do they choose the host plants that they choose? And what are the consequences of choosing a particular host plant? And what we know is that uh, there were a lot of studies done looking at what happens mechanistically when butterflies are choosing host plants. So this is what happens. So female locates a host plant. Let's say there's a host plant which the female likes. She locates it using both smell and vision. And then she lands on the plant. And these plants have, the leaves have certain chemicals on their surface, which can act as either something that the female will like or the female will not like. If the female likes, it's known as a stimulant. That means it increases her reaction to lay eggs. If it doesn't, then she moves on to the next plant. And what happens is that the female lands on the plant, and then she uses her front 2 legs and starts scratching on the surface of the leaf. And when she does that, all of these oviposition stimulants are released, and then she can taste it. So butterflies taste with their legs. They don't taste with their proboscis. They have literally nothing in their proboscis that can indicate taste or majorly. But most of their taste is through their what do you call the 4 legs, the first 2 legs. So when they scratch the leaf, the opposite stimulants are released, and they understand, okay, fine, this plant contains all the chemicals. This plant tastes like what I know is a good host plant. If that is the case, then they lay an egg. Otherwise, they just move away. So when they see that, when they taste it, that information is processed into the brain. And if that brain says, yeah, fine, this is a good host plant, then the eggs are laid. Otherwise, it's not laid. So what is really important here is this part, the gustatory receptor. That means the taste receptors. So for example, there are people who cannot taste, who taste cilantro or kothambari soppu as soapy. And that's because of a specific type of taste receptors that you have in your tongue. A lot of people have different tastes compared to, everyone else. So that is because of specific tastes in the specific taste receptors in your tongue. The same thing can also happen with butterflies, and it happens with butterflies. So depending upon what kind of taste buds the butterflies have, they lay eggs on, they like one plant or they cannot like one plant. And this is actually what determines if a butterfly has a very narrow set of host plants or a very large range of host plants. And so do all butterflies like all host plants? That's something that a lot of people have questions about. And what we do know is that not all butterflies like all plants, and even when a butterfly likes a very few specific set of plants, they still have something called as a ranking. So for example, I love lemon rice more than anything else. So it's like it's my ranking. So someone else might like biscuit bath more than anything else. So that ranking is what determines what a female likes. So for example, this study, which was done in 1994, is one of the first few studies looking at what females like and what females don't like. So this butterfly, Polygonia C album, which is a question, it's known as the question mark. So they took 5 females, and they know that the butterfly likes 4 host plants. And when they gave it 4 host plants, what they saw was that each female, for example, female 1 had variation in the number of eggs she laid on each plant, and there was variation among the plants itself. For example, Urtica was preferred in a different degree compared to Ulmus. So what we know from this is that there is individual preference by the female butterflies, and there is also a certain hierarchy of host plant quality that the females in general prefer. And this is important because we might see records of, okay, some, like for example, let's say the common mormon feeds on lemon in Bangalore, but it might not feed on lemon in, let's say, in Madhya Pradesh. It might feed on curry leaf. And if we try to feed, if we try to plant a lot of lemon plants in Madhya Pradesh, it may or may not do good for the butterfly. So a lot of these have to be understood, and you need to do, studies at your locality to see what actually happens here. And then there's also this idea of, let's say mom knows best. So that's something that biologists actually use, saying that the mother knows best. But is that actually true? Do moms actually know what is best for their kids? So what we expect in nature or everything in life is that, you expect whatever the mother prefers is what would be the best for the, larvae or your kid as well. But in real world, that is not often the case. So for example, the monarch butterfly, which was recently published, they looked at what happens when you give monarch butterflies a few plants, when you give the female the plants, and when you give the larvae the plants. So what happened here was the females preferred this particular species of Asclepias, the milkweed plant, which is also found in India. And they found that the females preferred it more than anything else. She laid an average of 9 eggs on this plant compared to any other egg. But when they tested the larval performance on it, that means how well the larvae ate, how well they developed, that had literally the worst performance compared to every other plant that was tested on. So there's all, in real life, it may not be the case that the mother actually knows what is best for the larvae. And this could be because the females are under different pressures and the larvae are under different pressures. And, a tussle between these could actually lead to a lot of mismatches and a lot of these problems. And we need to understand if female preference is actually correlated or if it is the same as what the larvae prefer. And if that is not the case, what is causing it and what can we do to rectify it so that, we have a good population of butterflies wherever you are. And this is from my own work, which is not published yet. So what do we know about the host plant use in butterflies of the Western Ghats? So what we know about Western Ghats butterflies is that most of the species feed on a very, very narrow range of plants. And what we know about endemic species is that the endemic species are mostly monophagous. That means they feed on a single host plant family compared to non-endemic species, and also habitat specialists feed on a very, very narrow set of host plants compared to habitat generalists. So for example, the endemic butterfly, the Malabar banded peacock, that feeds on only one host plant or one or two host plants or one host plant family, whereas the Papilio polytes, our common mormon, feeds on a multiple, families of host plants. And this is really important because we might say, okay, fine, we can destroy the forest in, let's say, in Karwar, and then we'll plant something in Mangalore. And people might say the butterfly is found in both the places and it might do well, but no, because whatever plants you're destroying there might not be the same as what you see in Mangalore, and those might have actually a lot more implications in the butterfly biology and its survival. And in fact, you might actually drive extinctions of butterflies. You might drive these butterflies to extinction without even realizing that this is what's happening. And the next thing when it comes to butterflies and plants is that there is this whole new world of interactions where you have ants helping out butterfly caterpillars survive in the wild. And this was a very interesting discovery a few decades ago when people saw that, okay, fine, there are these ants which go on to help the butterflies, they clean the butterflies, they make sure that the butterflies are taken care of, and then, they help them pupate and survive. And what do the ants get in return for doing this? The butterflies actually, the larvae actually produce sugary droplets, which the ants feed on. So the caterpillars are giving ants food, and the ants are taking care of it. It's a very, very nice mutualistic relationship. And what percentage of butterflies actually have it? So this kind of interaction is only seen in one butterfly family known as the blues family, the Lycaenid family. And not all Lycaenids actually have this association. So this was a study done in 2002 by Naomi Pierce and others. And what they found was that in India, so there were 60 interactions that they found. Well, so- yeah, can you please mute yourself? I'll, yeah, sorry. Yeah, what they found was that of the 60 60 species that they found, there were 13 which were obligate. That means these 13 species definitely needed the ants to survive, without which the caterpillars will not survive and they die. And 32 were facultative. That means these may, or these can kind of survive without ants, but if there are ants present, then they'll do well. And 15 species which did not have any interaction at all. And remember, this number is only for what was known in 2002, and that was only for butterflies found in the Western Ghats. So India is lagging a lot in terms of what we know about natural history, the biology of a lot of our wildlife. And I think that's something that a lot of citizen science can help in, and they have helped in. For example, Saji, Hemant, Ashok sir, Hanish sir, and Milan, they have been doing tons of early Insta rarings, and we know a lot more about butterflies and their host plants and their interactions because of that. And that is something that we still need to know, and we need to know about it at a local scale, which is what is known in the US. So in the US, we have so much more records because people have been keeping it since probably the last 200 to 250 years. So what the most important point I want to drive from here is that it's also important to not only look at plants and butterflies, but also look at what other creatures are associated with butterflies, and specifically ants. And a lot of people spray pesticides or something to get rid of ants from their house, but you don't know if the ant that you're killing or the ant that you're spraying might also be killing the butterflies that it depends on, and in turn might you know cause a cascade of reactions that might harm the environment. So it's really important to look at the whole natural world as very interconnected and not dispersed or distinct. And it is really important that we also start paying attention to all the other species that are also dependent on the butterflies here. But how does this ant, caterpillar interaction happen? Like I said, the caterpillar provides sugar and the ants, feed on it, and the ants kind of help them take care of things, and then they get better. So Dipendra and Krishnamay found this out recently in the lilac silverline butterfly. So this is the life cycle of it. The female lays eggs usually on the ground or near an ant nest or wherever the ants are present, and the eggs hatch into the caterpillar, and then you have these ants which walk on all over the caterpillar and taking care of it. And then they also take care of the pupa, like they just make sure that there is no fungus growing on it, there is no parasitoid coming on it, and things like that. And then the adult butterfly emerges. So what Deependra did was they dissected the larva and looked at it using computerized tomography scans. And what they saw was that the larvae had special structures which has co-evolved with these ants to make sure that they are able to interact with the ants. So the first one is the dew patch, which is on in this region on the top of the body. And this dew patch is really helpful because this is where the sugary droplet is present. And the sugary droplet is, protruded out of the body, and the ants come and feed on it. And these caterpillars have something known as a tactile organ. And this tactile organ is what the caterpillars use to locate ant nests or ants, or feel that, okay, fine, there is an ant coming in and this is what is important. And where is the nectar stored and where is the nectar produced? So they have something called as a nectar gland, which is directly connected to it is in the body. So whatever they're eating, they have a process where they convert that into nectar, and that gland is then used to produce the nectar. So these three structures have tightly co-evolved with ants so that they can interact very well with ants, so that the ants do not kill them. So if they didn't have any of these organs, what would have happened is that the ants would have just killed it and then eaten it. And Chromatogaster hotsoni, they do feed on a lot of other dead, and they're carnivorous. So they can actually attack these caterpillars if the caterpillars did not have these adaptations to make sure that they were not fed on. So that is what we know about, female. I mean, we know a lot more, but that is like a brief history of what we know about female host choice and larval preference and caterpillar interactions. And Harsha will be talking a lot more about it in his talk day after tomorrow. So the next thing which is really important to look at is what determines the mating choice of a butterfly. Why can't you just, if you, let's say, if you want to bring a bunch of butterflies in the house and start breeding them, which is illegal, do not do that. Why can't you do that, and why is it hard? And the reason why you can't do that is, or why it might not always work out, is because females and males have particular choices which they need to be met. And some of the most important is that the males have to be old. If the males, if you have a male butterfly emerging out of the pupae, and then you can't get it to mate right away because it needs to mature. It needs to, because it needs a certain kind of time to mature so that it is ready to mate. Whereas females have to mate the minute they eclose out of the pupae. If they do not mate right after they eclose out of the pupae, they will rarely mate after that. So usually females are mated as soon as they eclose out of the pupae, and males are mated, or males mate when they are actually older. The older the male, the younger the female. That is when you have successful mating with butterflies. And what we know about the factors, the environmental factors that affect mating, is that there is learning that happens in mating. So, for example, a butterfly female that is exposed to someone likes that particular kind of a butterfly, and generally, the brighter the male, the brighter the coloration and ornamentation, the more likely that the female will choose him. So, one of the easiest examples, or the simplest examples that I could think of, was this paper which showed how brighter ornamentation, for example, iridescence, which you see in this Danaidic fly butterfly, the purple spots, and UV help in mate choice. So what they did was, the purple line here is what the control butterflies are. That means in nature, this is what you see. And then when they used a particular kind of a paint to just paint the paint over that, and that reduced how much bright it was. And then they also covered the whole thing with a pen to see what it did. And when they compared what kind of a butterfly got more matings, the black is the control, and this is the pen, and this is the root end. And what they found was that females liked males which were more bright and colorful. And this is what is true in nature, that the brighter it is, the brighter the individual is, or more ornamentation the individual has, the higher the chances of mating. And that is because it's a quality that indicates that, okay, fine, this male is healthy, this male is surviving even though it is having so much brighter ornamentation that can be easier for predators to acquire. So if these are the two things that is great, and it's more fit, the females choose it, and that's what happens. So that's why you have such bright colors with peacock. Over a period of time, female peacocks, peahens, only found peacocks which had brighter feathers, and that's why that is being propagated. And that's the same thing which happens with butterflies as well. And what we also know is that the males and females do not just mate with anyone, like I said in the earlier slide. And also, what another really important thing which my advisor found out way back in 1979, and she was the first person to show this, was that when mating is occurring, males transfer nutrients to the females, and these females use that nutrients to actually produce eggs. So let's say a female mates with 5 different male butterflies, and there's a chance that the progeny can be of any of the 5 male butterflies. But more often than not, it's usually 1 or 2 males that actually are able to be the fathers of it. And that is because what happens is that when these nutrients are transferred to the the females kind of have, or sensory organs in their abdomen which can sense, okay, fine, this nutrient bag attached to this sperm is more compared to something else. So the females use whichever has the highest amount of nutrients, and they kind of use that to fertilize the eggs. The other things, they just absorb it as nutrition. So it is really important to also understand what kind of factors might influence uh, mating even after mating has occurred between butterflies. And this nutrient transfer gives rise to what is known as mud puddling in butterflies. So if you see, if you go around somewhere in a lot of riverbanks or places where you see wet soil, you see butterflies on the ground trying to suck um, salts and other nutrients from the soil. And that is because the males use this and they prepare something known as a spermatophore, and they pass on the spermatophore along with the sperm during mating, which the female uses. And they found this using radio tracer elements. So they fed butterflies with the radio tracer elements, and they tracked that once the butterfly, throughout the time when the eggs were laid. And what they saw was that whenever a butterfly mated, there was a huge increase in the radio tracer element in the eggs. And that kind of said that, okay, fine, these nutrients are actually coming from the males. And this has in fact led to a huge field of understanding what determines these nutrients, what kind of nutrients do males seek out, what kind of behaviors that does that lead to, and things like that. And moving on, uh, I also want to talk about aposematism, because that is something which butterflies are very, very well known for. So aposematism is nothing but warning coloration. So for example, if you see this butterfly, it's very distinct. It has bright orange and bright white. So any thing which sees it can understand, fine, this is something that is striking and it needs to be left alone. So for example, if you see bright red fruits in the forest, people say do not eat it because it might be poisonous. So usually that is what is also out in nature. So the brighter it is, the more toxicity it might have. So it's always good to avoid it. And that is what these butterflies have also evolved. These have very bright warning coloration along with striking pattern to make sure that the predators like birds or lizards avoid them. And how do these butterflies become aposematic? How do these butterflies become toxic? So there are two mechanisms. The first one is they feed on toxic plants. So when you feed on toxic plant like this blue tiger, which feeds on Vatakaka, which is a milkweed plant, and these milkweed plants have those white milky substances which are toxic. When they feed on it, they retain that toxin in their organs, and that is also transferred as to the adult, and they become toxic. And the second thing is that they can actually prepare their own toxic materials using intermediate compounds. So for example, this male butterfly here is feeding on something known as heliotropium, which is again very rich in alkaloids, which is a toxic compound. And what happens here is that the male feeds on it, and then it uses that to produce something known as PAs. It's a type of alkaloid, which is then used as a cue for mating. So they can prepare their own toxic compounds from feeding, or they can sequester it when they're feeding as larvae. And one really cool study, which Nikhil Gaitonde and Krishnamik did and was published in 2018, was how is what kind of life history traits can give rise to aposematism, and what can especially in early stages. So we know a lot of caterpillars are brightly colored, and a lot of caterpillars are toxic. What is the life history behind it? And they used Papilionidae, the swallowtail butterflies, to show it, because that is where we had the most amount of information in the world. So what they found out was that caterpillars that fed on plants which had very less number of leaves. For example, Aristolochia is a twine or a vine, and it has a very small amount of leaves. So if a caterpillar is sitting on Aristolochia, you can obviously see it. Whereas if a caterpillar is sitting on a lime tree, it's almost impossible to see it unless you go through it with a fine comb. So what they found out was that larvae that's fed on very less sparsely vegetated plants, and which were also toxic, were aposematic. So if the larvae fed on densely vegetated and toxic plants, they did not have aposematism. So very sparsely vegetated and toxic plants, if they fed something of this combination, they were aposematic. And larvae that fed on densely vegetated non-toxic plants usually had camouflage or masquerade as their defense mechanism. So camouflage is crypsis, where they just blend in with this surrounding, and masquerade is bird dropping. So if you look at Papilionidae, the black here is all non-toxic, and none of them have what do you call aposematic. They usually employ camouflage or masquerade, where they look as bird droppings. Whereas all of these butterflies, which are toxic here, which feed on toxic and sparsely vegetated plants, they turn out to be aposematic. And this was a very cool study which demonstrated it. And you can actually read about this in the paper on CRISPR-Make's website. So this is what we know about aposematism, and there's a lot more. I mean, there's a world of literature about it. And then moving on to one of the most interesting thing about butterflies is, how do butterflies see? I mean, do they see the same way as what we see? Do they see red, green, and orange, or red, green, and blue the way we see, or do they see something else? So what we know the minute you look at butterflies is that the butterflies have thousands and millions of small eyes which form the eye. So the eye is not a simple eye like what we have. It's called as a compound eyes. And each of the compound eye is made of an ommatidia. And this is what an ommatidia looks like. It has a cone, and then, it has, it's basically how, what do you call, the microscopic structure of the eye looks like. And it has tons of structures in it. You don't have to worry about it. But basically, butterflies have compound eyes, and they have small, the individual eyes are known as ommatidia. So because they have this, how different is their vision? Do they still see the way we see it? Turns out that they do not see the way we see it. So humans can see red, green, and blue, and we have three peaks, when you look at it under the wavelength. So for example, if you shine a spectrophotometer, which measures the VIBGYOR range, the rainbow range, you can say, okay, fine, VIBGYOR is from 350 to 700. And then you can say this is what they see. And that is what humans see, that is what a lot of things see. But what we know in butterflies is that their vision is way more complicated compared to humans, and they see way more colors compared to humans. For starters, butterflies can see UV, humans cannot see UV. And some butterflies have such fine-tuned vision, that means which is like orders of magnitude better than ours in terms of how, and that is dependent on how many receptors we have. And like I said, humans have three, whereas butterflies, it can range from 3 to 6. But this one butterfly known as common blue bottle, that has 15 receptors. I mean, I have no idea why it needs so much. And it means that it can see completely differently compared to any other organism that we know of in the world. And the only other organism that can beat it is the peacock shrimp, and that has 16 receptors. And we have no idea what the use of these receptors are. And it'll be really interesting to see what butterflies see. And I think that'll be a whole world of surprise for us. And how did this vision come into picture in butterflies? So what we know is that the ancestors of all the organisms, when they evolved eyes, had similar eyes. And based on what kind of environment they were in and what kind of life history they had, they evolved specific eyes and eye structures to suit that. And that's why you have binocular eyes and things which are predators, and you have eyes at the side which are prey. So for humans and other carnivores have eyes in front, whereas cows and other herbivores have their eyes in the side, because that is what helps them survive in the wild. So like I said, butterflies have a lot of receptors. And how did these receptors come into picture? Did they just occur out of nowhere? No. What happened was that whatever ancestral receptors they had, or the pigments they had, that got duplicated multiple number of times to give rise to different types of vision in butterflies. So for example, in Papilionidae, if you have, if the butterfly ancestor had 3, there were 2 duplication, and that's why they have 5. And in Lycaenid, they had 1 duplication, and that's why they have 4. And in Rhyodinidae, the metal marks, they have a different kind of duplication, and that's why they have a different thing. So this kind of gives a picture into understanding the biology of butterflies and what kind of environments they live in. So Papilionidae might have different life histories compared to Nymphalidae. That's why Nymphalidae have retained their ancestral butterfly vision, whereas Papilionidae have lot better and fine-tuned vision. And you can relate that to the way they fly, or the way they mostly fly in the canopies and things like that, so that they might need better vision compared to, for example, let's say Lycaenid or Pieridae or something like that. So that's what people have found out. And one really important thing about butterflies, I don't think any other organism has this, is that these butterflies have eye-like structures in their genitalia, which is very, very surprising. I don't think any other insect has, we have seen that in any other insects. And what we know is that this is the male and this is the female, and this is their abdomen tip, which they use for mating. There are eye-like structures. For example, P1 and P2 are the photocells which detect light, and that's the same in the females. And there are eye-like structures both in males and female genitalia, and they serve as different functions in both females and males. For example, in the females, without these eye-like structures in the genitalia, they cannot pinpoint where to lay eggs. So they'll go onto the host plant, but they won't be able to lay eggs without it. And for males, it is very important, without which they really cannot mate. So they can go and court a female, they can initiate mating, but they cannot successfully mate because they need these eye-like structures in the genitalia to mate. And when people did experiment looking at what happens if we kind of remove those structures, so this is the black is what the mating success is. So when you keep it intact, there is more mating success. And when you know, apply heat and kill it, there is less mating success. And when you actually just paint it black, like make it, you know, blindfold it, there is the least amount of mating occurring. So it is really important for these butterflies to have these structures in the genitalia to actually see and mate and locate host plants very clearly. And this is the last but one part of what I'll be talking about. And this is something that Krishna Megh's lab specializes in, the biology of mimicry. And he's done tremendous amount of work. And if you really want to look at it, you should look at his website and, you know, learn more about mimicry. But I'm going to just talk about very few simple things about what we know about mimicry. So mimicry is where one organism looks like another organism, and that's because the organism that it is trying to mimic is usually poisonous. So what I mean by that is that this butterfly known as Papilio polytes, the common mormon, looks like this. So this is the male and this Cyrus female. And this is on the left here is what the females look like when they are mimetic. And the right here are the models that they are trying to mimic. And these models on the right are the ones which are toxic because they feed on Aristolochia. The common, the crimson rose, common rose, these are the butterflies that are toxic. And when you mimic these toxic butterflies, you are also saved from being eaten up. So Papilio polytes or the common mormon butterflies have female limited mimicry. And it is really important for females to mimic more than males because females are the ones which are more precious in nature, because females are the ones which have eggs, females are the ones which are going to carry the generation forward. So females are expensive, they are, you know, they're very, very important, whereas males are abundant, so their resource is not as valuable as what females are. So if a female is mimicking, that is good enough for the, you know, species to survive. And what we know is that how is this mimicry possible? And that's a question which I think a lot of people have. Why is that? You know, how is it controlled? Is it controlled because of environment? Is it controlled because of some other thing? So what we know about Papilio polytes is that the mimetic forms, what uh, you know, if it's a Romulus female or if it's a Stichius female, is all dependent on one single gene known as double sex. And this is present in all organisms actually. Double sex is present in every insect in the world, or actually an analog of it is also present in humans and everyone else. And this double sex, the main function of double sex is determining sex. So when you, depending upon what kind of double sex you have, you might either be a male or female. And this double sex has, you know, gone further evolution, or, you know, it has been further fine tuned to also act as a mimicry gene. So depending upon what kind of double sex you have, you can either be you know, a non-mimetic Cyrus female, a mimetic Stichius female, or a mimetic Romulus female. And Christopher Meg found this out through a bunch of, you know, mating around 400 different combination, you know, butterflies, and he used a lot of molecular tools to identify that particular gene. And I can talk about this sometime in the future if people are more interested in, you know, understanding how we actually find these things in the genome. So that is what is controlled. That is what controls mimicry in Papilio. A single gene known as double sex controls mimicry. And depending upon what form of the double sex you have, you can either be Cyrus or Stichius or Romulus. And mimicry in the Western Ghats, because a lot of, you know, people here I've seen that, a lot, I've seen butterflies in the Western Ghats, so we know what the mimicry looks like. So Western Ghats has a lot of species which are in the mimicry ring. So for example, Delius, the common Jezebel, is the toxic butterfly, and the painted sawtooth mimics it. We know the Danaidic fly female mimics the plain tiger, and so on and so forth. So each distinct group forms what is known as a mimicry ring. So mimicry ring is where you have toxic and non-toxic species in one group which have the similar appearance. So what we know in the Western Ghats is that the Western Ghats has way fewer number of mimicry rings compared to any other region, for example, in Hong Kong or Eastern Himalayas. And that is because the Western Ghats mimicry ring is formed because of a lot of random processes. So that has very, important implications in evolutionary biology and biogeography. But what you need to know is that compared to a lot of other regions in the world, especially in Southeast Asia, Western Ghats has the least number of mimicry rings present. And the last thing that I want to touch upon is what we know about the migration of butterflies and migration in butterflies in general. When people talk about migration, they only talk about uh, monarch migration because that is what is known very well around the world, and rightly so. But there's also another kind of migration that happens in the Western Ghats, and that is known as the Danine migration. Again, related species to the monarch, but a different genus. And this migration is very special because this migration is the only one which is east to west. Every other migration is actually from north to south or south to north, whereas this is from east to west and west to east. So what happens in brief with the migration is that in the Western Ghats during between April and June, when you have monsoon occurring, these butterflies want to escape it and they start migrating from there to the Eastern Ghats. And once they reach the Eastern Ghats, they start laying eggs. And then these eggs hatch and they become adults. And that is the right in the time when the northeast monsoons occur in September, between September to December. And then they start migrating back to the Western Ghats where they lay eggs and then they mature, and by that time it's already June, April to June. So this cycle keeps happening, and that is how you have migrations occurring at very specific time points. And it is very dependent on the monsoon. If the monsoon doesn't occur, then you don't have migration because they don't have any cue or clue to migrate. So it is very, very dependent on the monsoon. Um, and what do we know about the biology of migration? So let's say there are males and females of different species which migrate. And what we know here is that, right, if you see this graph here, there are 4 species which migrate and 4 species which do not migrate, which they have compared for, Vaishali and Krishnameg. And what they found out was that when butterflies are migrating, the females and males look very similar. That means the females do not have any eggs in them. So when they're migrating, there is literally no eggs in the females, and they only have eggs once they finish migrating. So what do these females invest in if they're not investing in their abdomen or their eggs? We know that the females are investing in thorax. That means the flight muscle, and that helps them fly over uh, the Western Ghats and reach the Eastern Ghats. So what we know, and this is really important because not a lot of people have shown that while migrating, there is complete stopping of reproduction occurring in these butterflies. And is it the same when we talk about other species? So this is the Danine migration. And if you are part of the Western Ghats migration group, you might have seen that there are reports of people saying, this butterfly is migrating, that butterfly is migrating throughout the year. But are they actually migrating, or are they dispersing? People have trouble differentiating those. So migration is when you have a set route, and dispersal is where you just move from one place to another place because you don't have resources anymore. It's like, let's say if these butterflies are in Bangalore, they just fly from Bangalore because there are no more plants in Bangalore. That is dispersal. If the plants were in Bangalore, they may or may not actually disperse. Whereas migratory species, they move regardless of resources being there or not, and this is driven by environmental factors. And what they found out was that they used the immigrants, both common and mottled immigrants, to look at what happens between males and females, and then what happens when you compare that with the denied migration. What they see here is that the butterflies which were dispersing, the females had eggs instead of just investing in their flight. So what this means is that dispersal is purely resource driven, whereas migration is climatic driven, and they have complete opposite reactions when it comes to biology. So when migratory species are flying, the females have no reproduction, their reproduction is completely stopped. Whereas when these immigrants are dispersing, the females are loaded with eggs. They can just, keep laying eggs wherever they find a host plant on their way. Whereas the migratory butterflies, they start from Western Ghats, go all the way to the Eastern Ghats, and only then start mating and then reproducing. And this is really important because if you want to understand what butterflies migrate, what butterflies disperse, we need to be sure. Just saying that all butterflies are migrating, a crimson rose is migrating, or a common lime is migrating makes no sense if you really do not know what's happening beneath it. And all of this, is possible because people keep contributing their records to citizen science platforms. And once a citizen science platform is the Butterflies of India, we already have almost 98,000 images as of today morning. And using these images, using these records, using a lot of these, scientists can actually come up with a lot of interesting things about biology of these butterflies. So I encourage all of you to, what do you call, uh, contribute your records here. And with this, I finish my talk. And if you have any questions, either you can mute, or if Swati or Priya can, ask me those questions, I'll be able to answer them.
Yeah, we have a question from Vishesh PV. Which butterflies are active at night?
So if you see some of these common evening browns and these skippers like the uh, giant red eye and banana skipper, they are active at night because their eyes are a little bit different compared to the other butterflies. So these butterflies actually have more adaptation, which specific adaptations which help them see during the night as well. So there are some butterflies which are also active in the night, and that is depending upon what kind of visual pigments they have.
Now we have a question from Hiranmai K. Were butterflies there before dinosaurs?
So if you think about, I mean, again, you have to define what you call a butterfly. Would you call that 260 million year old fossil as a butterfly? Probably not, because it looked like something what we see in today's butterflies. So modern day butterflies were not there at the time of dinosaurs, but the ancestors of butterflies were there at the time of dinosaurs. The modern day butterflies came about around 119 million years ago, and that was during the peak when the dinosaurs were at their peak. And but the absolute modern day butterflies came about after the dinosaurs went extinct.
The next question is from Radhika. Which is the safest pesticide we can spray so that we can use that, or we use which is beneficial to the plants as well as not be harmful to the butterflies?
Use spiders and other parasitoids. Do not use any pesticides. Bring in a bunch of spiders. Just leave it as it is. And I'm pretty sure spiders and other parasitoids find these butterflies and they eat it up. If I would say that is literally the safest way to do things, because no matter what you spray, there are a lot of organic things, but they might not be as effective as what the chemical pesticides are. For example, if you spray neem oil, that is effective only during the early stages of infestation. But if you have a lot of infestation, then it might not actually work. But the best way to control these are through natural predators and keeping, making sure, your environment is as pesticide free as possible.
Next, we have a question from Chandrasekharan. Any clue about the feeding of lilac cats?
Sir, you'll have to probably wait for it in a few months. We'll be out of, we are publishing what we are publishing the whole biology of that butterfly. So yeah, I really cannot speculate on that right now. But yeah, in a few months, you'll know what it feeds on.
Another question from Savita Bharti. Nitin, what would you say of interspecies mating? Why or how does that happen?
So interspecies mating can happen because of a lot of reasons. The first one is, when, for example, a male butterfly of one species and the female butterflies of another species are very closely related. So, for example, the common mormon and the great mormon, which is found in the northeast, those are very, very closely related, and these do not have enough differences between them to actually prevent mating. So that is one way when interspecies mating can happen. But this interspecies mating may not be successful. They can mate, but the number of chromosomes in common mormon may be different than the number of chromosomes in great mormon, and that might just lead to abortion. So interspecies mating is rarely successful, and when it is successful, it is because the interspecies, the species which is a hybrid, is has more uh, fitness compared to any other, compared to either of the two original butterflies, and it can happen because of chance events. It can also happen because there is a certain environment where both of these two different species, which do not usually meet in nature, have started meeting. For example, let's say there are, you have a river, and on each side of the river there are two land masses, and on each landmass you have two different species, and you have a different species. Let's say because of drought and every other thing, the butterflies are now able to cross over. That can lead to interspecies mating. So it can be a combination of a lot of factors, but chance mating, a lot of environment related factors, and if the hybrid has more, fitness compared to the parents, then it might lead to hybrid mating.
We have another interesting question from Hiranmayi. How far can butterflies see?
Probably not too far because they have ommatidia. I mean they can. It depends again on the species. Some species can see very far. Some species can barely see anything. So it again depends on species specific. For example, papillonets have excellent vision. And that's also the reason why they have so much of visual pigments and receptors. Whereas these butterflies which are found in the dense canopy, like evening browns, bush browns, they might have not so great a vision because they really don't see so much. It again depends on what kind of adaptations you are talking about.
Next question from Manaska. Will a butterfly only mimic if the species it is mimicking is present in the same area and environment?
That is actually a very, very, very good question. That is what people assume. That is what even scientists assume, that you have mimicry occurring only when you have model species. And that is what people have shown so far. But there are very few reports where they say models, mimics without the models. And I don't know how they survive. And I'm not sure if there's anyone else in the audience who can elaborate more. But you can have instances where you have these mimicry species, but the models are not there. And that's probably because the butterflies have still, sorry, that is because the predators still think that this butterfly is toxic. Once the predators learn that these butterflies are no longer toxic, I'm pretty sure that these will go extinct. And again, it depends on very specific locality conditions.
From Neha Majumdar, we have a question. Thank you for the informative talk. I came across an old reference in JBNHS that females of lime butterfly tap the leaves of larval host plant, citrus lemon, before laying eggs, a process called drumming. Do other swallowtails and other family members show such behavior?
Yeah, in fact, all butterflies do drumming, because drumming is also one way to either, if you're a blue butterfly, that means you are calling the ants to come to you. Or if you're any other species of butterfly, that means, while drumming, there are also certain receptors in the female's tip of the abdomen, which tells you how good or bad the host plant is. So drumming actually helps that.
We have one more question. How many such species migrate under Danine?
So, in the Western Ghats, we know 4 species of Danines migrate in big numbers. Those double-banded black crow, common crow, dark blue tiger, and blue tiger. These are the 4 butterflies which migrate in big numbers. And there are also some other butterflies like the brown king crow and striped tigers which migrate along with it, but they are in very few numbers. So 4 species make up the majority, and the rest just migrate because they see other butterflies moving around.
From Ganeshwari, we have a question. I have seen some pictures of two silver-lined butterflies facing each other, face to face. Is there any reason behind this behavior?
That's male-male competition. Basically, the males are fighting it out to see who the better male is, so that that better male can actually mate with the female. So it can be. That's one thing which I've not covered at all, and I'm hoping that Harsha will cover it in his talk 2 days from now. So when there is a lot of intense male competition occurring when butterflies are trying to get mates, so it can be through fights, it can be through territorial behavior, it can be through face to face coming of two butterflies and then just lashing it out with their proboscis or their forelegs. So it is a type of male competition.
Question from Dr. Anantram. How do the butterflies decide on the route for migration?
So the route for the migration is decided based on what the factors were when the first or the first few migrations occurred. So it is a set path which has been determined based on what is favorable for the butterfly. So for example, if we say that the butterflies migrate from east to west in this particular direction, that means it depends on wind pressure, altitude, humidity, moisture, temperature, surrounding elevation, and also what kind of habitat is there below. So a lot of these abiotic factors or environmental factors determine what route the migratory butterflies take. And this brings me to a very interesting point about monarch migration. So apparently what monarchs do is that they keep flying in one straight line in when they fly from the when they fly during the winter migration. And at one particular point, apparently they take a 90-degree turn, even though there is nothing blocking it. And they just take a 90-degree turn and they fly in the other direction. And scientists have now found out that it was because millions of years ago, there was a mountain there and the butterflies had to take a 90-degree turn because of that mountain. And even now, today there is no mountain, but the route has been fixed or it has been imprinted on these butterflies that they will turn 90 degrees no matter if there's a mountain or if there's nothing blocking their view.
Okay. From Prisha, we have, in terms of reproduction, aren't dull colored butterflies at a loss, like dark evening browns or some skippers?
No, not at all, because you're not talking about dark evening brown mating with the crimson rose. You're talking about dark evening browns mating with dark evening browns. And if you see dark evening browns, when they open their wings, you see these yellow and purple spots on their forewing, which are actually used as cues for mating. So each and every species, just because it is brown doesn't mean that it is dull. And it also means that, that's the only part that we can see. Remember that butterflies can see using UV. So under UV, these bush prawns might actually look entirely different, right?
We have a question from Facebook from Nikahat Sumaya. How to protect pupa and caterpillars from predators?
Unless you have a specific reason as to why you want to protect it, I would say just leave it, because the pupae and caterpillars are in fact food for a lot of other organisms. So unless let's say you are doing it for a specific reason, saying that there is some extinction going on or something like that, the best way to do that would be to get it into the lab and then rear it under very uh, strict aseptic conditions. And it is not advisable to do it in general because, like I said, they are food for butterflies.
Another question is, what is butterfly effect?
So that is not related to biology. That is related to what you call as chaos theory, where basically what it says is that when you have a wing flap of a butterfly, let's say in India, it might cause a earthquake in California. So it has nothing to do with butterflies. It's completely with chaos theory. If you want to get a very funny interpretation of it, you should see the Jurassic Park movie.
Why predators the next question on mimicry, why predators have not evolved to understand the mimicry?
That is because of what is known as learning behavior. Let's say you are a small bird which has just started flying and you catch a toxic butterfly. The experience is so bad. Imagine if For example, yeah, let's think about it in our own life perspective. Let's say you go to a hotel and you have a very, very bad case of food poisoning. Would you ever go back there? No, right? So the same thing is what happens with birds and other predators as well. They eat this by accident and they see how bad it tastes and how sick it makes them. So they remember that pattern and color, and that's why having that pattern and color helps these butterflies. So they just avoid saying that, okay, fine, I'd rather starve than eat this thing and fall sick again. That's why they don't evolve, or they just think it's fine to just leave it. And what has happened is that these mimetic butterflies have evolved so close to mimic perfectly. So that means it's almost impossible for a lot of us in nature, even if you're seeing it, that it becomes difficult for us to even differentiate between these models and mimics. And when someone like us who can actually differentiate it well have trouble, imagine what's going to be happening in the bird's brain when it has to make these decisions in split seconds.
Okay. From Dr. Anantram, what are the ways the butterflies use to attract their mates for reproduction?
So like I said, I mean, it can be visual cues where it shows how bright or ornamented it is. It can be chemical cues where it releases scent scales, which I've not spoken about. And then it can also be the dancing moves where it actually shows how good it dances. And then, yeah, all of these factors can influence mate choice.
From Dalip Singh, Sir, butterfly can migrate from one geographic zone to other geographic zone.
So you need to define what a geographic zone is. For a butterfly, uh, a forest to a grassland itself is a different geographic zone. But if you talk about in terms of human geographic zones, yeah, I mean, in monarch butterflies, it happens where they migrate from all the way down to Mexico till up to the up to the northern part of the US. So they can easily transition geographic zones.
Uh, which butterfly species have maximum lifespan period?
It again depends on what species you're looking at. Some of these, denines like the long-winged butterflies known as heliconias, or these tigers and plain tigers and striped tigers, or these crows, they have very long lifespan. Also, southern birdwings also have very long lifespans. Whereas these blues, such as tiny grass blue or grass jewels, they have very, very short lifespans.
Okay. From Prisha, also, how does the dry season form, wet season form work? Does it depend on when the butterflies were born, or is it affected on adults by biotic, abiotic factors?
So it is actually decided during the larval stages, and this is not decided. I mean, most of the time, dry and wet season form is not decided by the genetics. It's mostly decided by what kind of temperature they were grown in. So wet season and dry season forms are decided when the adults are in, sorry, when the caterpillars are in the second to fourth instar, somewhere between that. And it depends on what the caterpillar perceives around it. And if it perceives that the temperature is good enough and it's humid and hot, it then regulates its hormonal development. This hormone is known as ecdysone, and it regulates it and makes sure that it kind of becomes whatever is um, favorable in that condition. So if you take a bunch of eggs from a single female and rear it in two different ways, you can actually have both wet and dry season form in the same batch.
From Surabhi Balaji, we have a question. What are the reasons for aberrations in butterflies? How do you tell it's an aberration and not wet season or dry season form?
So that is again, aberration is aberration where it occurs once in a while, whereas a dry season or wet season form is more of a pattern that you would expect to see. So a butterfly with one black big patch is not something you see very often, and that would be called an aberration. Whereas dry season and wet season form, you know that this is what you would expect. That is how you differentiate between um, what do you call dry season or wet season versus aberrations.
One last question. How moths migration is different from butterflies?
I think it would be the same. It's just that moths might fly during the night versus butterflies flying during the day. And you need to understand that migration in general has very conserved or very specific type of triggers and specific types of characteristics. So, for migration, either if it's a bird or a mammal, like the wildebeest migration or butterflies or moths, what you need is an environmental trigger, a physiological response to it, and a set path. And it is, depending upon what kind of species you're talking about or what kind of group you're talking about, it might differ, but in general, it's all in the same. So I see one more question from Kantraju, which says, does the color of the butterfly change from generation to generation? And it does not. I mean, it can change from generation to generation depending upon what genes is being expressed. So let's assume that a butterfly has red color, and if that red color is controlled by 5 genes, and if the butterfly mates with a male which has 3 or 2 genes, and that might actually give rise to progeny which have orangish color or something like that. So it all depends on how many genes of that particular color you have and how much of it is expressed. If it's expressed a lot, you have brighter colors. If it's expressed less, you have duller colors. And yeah, are there any more questions?
I think we can close, Nitin.
Yeah, okay, perfect. Thank you.
Just flash, just show your email address. If anyone has any questions, they can reach you.
Yeah, if any of you have any questions, you can always contact me through my email or through WhatsApp. I mean, the best way to contact me through WhatsApp is through, uh, post questions on the butterfly groups that are out there, and I might keep checking them and I'll answer those. But if you have any pressing questions, yeah, if you have questions, I check my emails more than my WhatsApp, so emails would be the fastest way to reach me.
So thank you, Nitin, for that wonderful talk, telling us so many fascinating things about the butterfly, many of which I'm sure many of us learned for the first time. It was really nice hearing your talk and all the things that you have talked about. Thank you.
Thank you so much as well.